everybody. I'd like to do another installment on my series on the book of Joel. This will be part 11, and I'll call it Selling the Innocent for Harlots and Wine. For behold, in those days and at that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land, and they have cast lots for my people, and have given a boy for a harlot, and sold a girl for wine, that they might drink. Joel 3, 1-3. The final count of the four-count indictment against the nations of the world by the infinite, personal, holy, sovereign King of the universe is that they have sold out the boys and girls of Israel, God's people, for the hire of a harlot, and that they might sate their thirst for wine. Now, what does this mean, and how could it possibly apply to the nations of the world? How have the nations prostituted themselves as regards the children, literal, of Israel? Why did they do this, and what is it that they have been so thirsty for that they've been willing to do so? Israel is a nation which from its rebirth in 1948 has been in a state of siege by its sworn, implacable, and at the same time impotent enemies, the Muslim Arab states that surround it. They hate Israel and would wipe it off the map. Having been humiliatingly defeated in 5 major wars in which the Muslim armies outnumbered the fledgling state of Israel some 10-1, the Arabs have resorted to the same kind of cowardly warfare that the Amalekites waged against Israel. As Moses relates, remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when you were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when you were faint and weary, and he feared not God? Deuteronomy 25, 17-18. This would include a war on the unsuspecting, the weak, the vulnerable, and on children, boys and girls. The so-called intifada of the last 50 years has been well documented and is known for the quality of merciless savagery against the innocent. The cold-blooded slaughter of the 1972 Israeli Olympic team, the exploding of buses, attacks on Jewish schools, the murder of school children in caves, parks, pizza parlors, and anywhere else that these so-called martyrs, unquote, managed to pull off, have been met with a strange indifference by the rest of the world. There has been little official outrage or condemnation that hasn't also included an equivalence argument or a lecture against the Jews. On the other hand, the late Yasser Arafat, who is the father of modern terrorism, has been feted as a man of peace, a virtual George Washington, a freedom fighter, and a patriot standing up for his people. He actually addressed the UN with a holster strapped on his hip to a standing ovation. The ultimate sign that the world is utterly insane in its opposition to God was the fact that this blood-stained murderer was actually awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1994. Jewish boys and girls have not been valued by the nations of the earth, for when vicious predators such as Arafat and the terrorism that he spawned slaughtered them, the world could only for the most part lecture Israel on provoking these modern Amalekites. In the Arab world, the slaughterers of innocent women and children have streets named after themselves. They are regarded as holy men, and their families are praised. One sickening example of this is that of the child killer who was released in one of those disproportionate prisoner exchanges Israel is often pressured into. This from the Sydney, Australian Morning Herald. I quote, "In Jerusalem, an Israeli spokesman condemned the hero's welcome according to Kantar in Beirut yesterday. Kantar is a brutal child murderer who, instead of being rejected upon his return, was cheered and greeted like a rock star. This is disgusting and deplorable," said David Baker, a spokesman from the Israeli Prime Minister's office. How have we nations prostituted ourselves, selling out Jewish boys and girls? We have betrayed our own values of human rights, selling them out by looking the other way to appease perhaps the worst violators of human rights in the world today, the Arab Muslim world. To appease them, we hold Jewish life and rights cheap, forcing them into indefensible borders, muting our usual condemnation of human rights violators so as not to offend. What is it that we're so thirsty for that we would prostitute ourselves, our own stated values, which we were never afraid to champion before, in the face of communism and fascism? Well, we called all those communists and fascists on human rights. What about the Arabs? What about the Saudis? Our wine in the modern industrial world is oil, cheap, easily accessible oil, which the Lord has seen fit to put in the hands of the Arabs as a moral test, which the nations of the world are failing. For this cause, this is the fourth indictment. God is going to bring the nations of the world into judgment. Shalom.